A very powerful story that we believe is if you work longer hours, you're going to do better work. Even the language that we use, I'm going to put in 150%. I'm going to go above and beyond. I'll answer your emails at 3 a.m. And we tend to equate that with the best workers. You have to really look at the data to show that that's not true at all. Long work hours are associated with fuzzy thinking, making mistakes, getting sick. It makes us sick and stupid. It doesn't lead to better work. If you are going to have an innovation or a creative idea, the neuroscience shows you need to be well rested and relaxed. You're not in that state when you are just grinding it out. At 10 o'clock at night, I got to finish this deadline. As work continues to change and we require, more creativity and innovation, our value is going to be in that new idea. Being burned out isn't going to get you there.
Hey everyone, I'm Jean Chatzky. Thank you so much for joining me today on HerMoney. I'm just going to say out loud what we all know and feel. We work too much. Americans actually spend more time working than any other developed country, 400 more hours per year than Germany, 300 more hours per year than folks in the UK, 185 more hours per year than Japan. That's according to 2023 data from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. And you would think that we are working all of these extra long hours because we're doing work that feels necessary and engaging and fulfilling. But that's not the case either. An April survey from Gallup found that only 30% of U.S. workers feel fully engaged at our jobs. That is the lowest engagement they've recorded in the past 11 years. So what's this all about? Well, the Wall Street Journal recently made the argument that we just don't care about our jobs as much as we used to. We're putting more meaning into our friends and families and our hobbies. And we know that ever since the pandemic, the way that we work and the way that we think about work has changed profoundly. But still, we are spending an awful lot of our lives working. So how do we make sure that we are doing work that is A, productive, and B, enjoyable? Brigid Schulte is the author of Overwork, Transforming the Daily Grind in the Quest for a Better Life. She spent 10 years researching our discontent with work and looking to countries, companies, and people who are simply doing it better. And she says, rather than making sure that employees are in desk chairs or in the office for strict 40-hour work weeks, we need to offer more flexibility. And we need to define what good work is. That doesn't always mean work that makes us money. Brigid, hey, welcome to the show.
Hey, so great to be here. Thanks.
So your first book, which was called Overwhelmed, I sense a theme here. Overwhelmed, Work, Love, and Play When No One Has the Time. It came out in 2014, and this is sort of a follow-up to that. What made you decide to tackle this part of our life right now?
Yeah, so when I finished Overwhelmed, that was really a book that came out of my own experience. At that time I was working full time in daily newspapers, trying to have this, I don't want to call it high power career, but a very demanding career that I cared a lot about. But I was also a mother of 2 young children, and it was really important to me to be a really good mother. And to have time for that and to have the quality of life and create a home that was sort of like an oasis. And I just felt like I was failing at everything, inadequate at work and inadequate at home. And so that was sort of the journey of Overwhelmed, is like, why is it so difficult for women in particular, for people with care responsibilities, to be able to combine meaningful work and time for care? And so that was the journey of that book. And when I got to the end of it, I just felt that so much of what drives kind of the external factors that drive a lot of suffering and misery really originate in our work culture. The way we think about work, the way we organize it, the way we do it, particularly in the United States. And because we're such a large and powerful country, we're exporting some of those values across the world in ways that are also really harmful. And so it's a different kind of book, because while Overwhelmed was more of an internal journey to try to understand my own experience and people like me, although I found an awful lot of people feeling very overwhelmed in a number of different situations, this is really an outward look. I do a lot of storytelling of a number of different people's stories to try to understand what's driving overwork, what the consequences are, what it's costing us, is there any benefit to it? And then also really focusing on how do you change it? And so to me, like halfway through the reporting, I got super depressed. and then I began looking for, well, who are the visionaries? Who's thinking about it differently? Who's doing cool things? And I really began looking, and it's really the stories of change agents, companies, individuals, workers' movements, CEOs, public policy, all across the board at all levels, people really thinking differently about work. Because there's no doubt, Americans in particular, but all of us, work is very important in our lives. It not only provides our daily bread, we need that to survive, to make money, to live, but it does, in the best sense, it gives us a sense of meaning and purpose. It connects us to other people. And so the question for me is, how do you contain that so we preserve what's best and most meaningful about work without having it just squeeze out time for anything else in our lives?
I want answers to all of those questions that you just raised. But before we dive into them, is this a women's issue more than it is an issue for men?
It's everyone's issue. What I would say is this is a human issue, but I think that the impact falls disproportionately on women. The costs and consequences are borne disproportionately by women and people with care responsibilities. And I like to say people with care responsibilities because for generations it's been primarily women, but that's also changing, particularly when you look at elder care and we've got this aging population. And so more and more men are becoming active caregivers. And so I think that's important to remember too. In the book, one of the statistics that blew my mind at first, but the more you think about it, the more it makes sense. There was one Harvard Business School survey that found that nearly 3/4 of all workers, all employees, have some form of care responsibility. So it's really a care issue. And care has been feminized, which is why why we think about it as a women's issue, and women have borne so much of the consequence. But it's becoming a human issue. It's becoming an everyone issue. It's an economic issue. It's a human rights issue. It's an economic justice issue.
One of the arguments that you lay out is that the way that we work is somewhat of a choice, and that for 98% of human history, we lived and worked in these egalitarian hunter-gatherer societies. When and why and how did that start to change? And what can we learn from the fact that it has changed a bit to make it better in the future?
Well, I think that's what's so exciting about change, is that we know how to do this. It's really wired in our human DNA. One of the books that I read that I was very influenced by was it's a book by a Dutch historian named Jan Lucassen, who wrote The Story of Work, which is this massive tome. But it was brilliant because it went all the way back to the Pleistocene era, like what is the story of work and the relationship between humans and work. And you're right. One of the things that he really brings out is that the best work has always been cooperative. Like, humans survive because we help each other, we care about each other, we work together. And so when you look for 98% of our human history, it has been very egalitarian. People have different roles. We work together in whether it was small bands or small communities. And then that began to shift. Lucassen sort of pinpoints it to an era when the agricultural revolution, and then all of a sudden there were surpluses. And then he calls them these aggrandizers, people who came in with a good story and said, I need more. And that was sort of the first time that inequality was sort of introduced into the system. And when you think about it, it was all based on a story. The elites or the priests or kind of like a small band of people saying, I deserve more, and telling a story about why, and then everybody believing it. And to me, it was a sort of an aha moment. It's like, oh, the power of story, the power of the narratives we choose to believe we can choose a different story. And that's what's so, to me, kind of freeing.
Freeing, yes, but maybe more difficult than ever. We live and work in the Instagram age and the TikTok age where people are telling stories about why they deserve more on a daily basis. And it is harder than ever, I think, not to go down the rabbit hole and look at them and want what they have and think that working harder is the way that you're going to get there. So how do we break that chain and then break that mindset or that belief? Because one of the threads that I know that you followed is that it's not necessarily working harder that is the key.
Yes, that's such an important point. You know, you started out this whole session with the long work hours that the United States works. And so I really wanted to look into that because we do have, a very powerful story that we believe is if you work longer hours, you're going to do better work. You know, that there's a measure of excellence, even the language that we use. I'm going to put in 150%. I'm going to go above and beyond. We expect that. I'm a go-getter. I'll be here. I'll be here first thing in the morning. I'll, stay late at night or in a virtual setting. I'll answer your emails at 3 a.m. And we tend to equate that with the best workers. And I think you have to really look at the data to show that's not true at all. That long work hours, there are sort of two things I want to say. One, that long work hours are not productive. And the second thing is that one of the reasons why work isn't working is that all of those hard and long hours are not getting you the rewards that they might have at one time. So a lot of people, particularly sort of in service and hourly and low wage work, are working harder and just to stay running on a treadmill. So we need to think about work kind of differently. Hourly workers are really struggling. They're overworking in a number of different professions just to try to survive. And for knowledge workers or desk workers, the expectation is you're going to overwork in one job just to prove your commitment to work. But so that's sort of one of the main things I want people to understand. But the other thing is, on the productivity argument, all you have to do is look at the data. Long work hours are associated with fuzzy thinking, making mistakes, getting sick. It makes us sick and stupid. It doesn't lead to better work. If you are going to have an innovation or a creative idea, the neuroscience shows you need to be well rested and relaxed and in a dreamy, kind of a daydreamy state. There is a reason we're actually physiologically wired to get our best ideas in the shower, where you relax and, kind of wondering about this, and your mind's wandering. You're not in that state when you are just grinding it out and pushing through, and at 10 o'clock at night, I got to finish this deadline. So as we move, as work continues to change and we require more creativity and innovation, and tech is changing stuff, and AI is going to do a lot of stuff that we used to. And so our value is going to be in that new idea. Being burned out isn't going to get you there. And then when you look at these hours, you look at GDP per hours worked on these large scales, the evidence is so clear that the longer the work hours, the lower the productivity. And so I think that's a big story that the data really backs up. That's a story that needs to end.
In order to change, though, you need buy-in from those big institutions that you were talking about. And you also, in a smaller but just as important way, need buy-in from a landscape of mostly smaller employers. I was thinking about what you said about having kids and the realization that dawned on you when that happened. For me, when I had children, I became more productive. I realized that I had other priorities. I wanted to be home. And so all of a sudden, I was writing better stories in less time. It was not a conscious decision. It was something that happened. And then I was like, oh, I'm not getting up and walking around the office as much or talking to my friends, or these were the days before you could go down the internet rabbit hole. But I did really believe that I was doing better work in a smaller period of time. But barring that sort of a life change, how do we get the big and small players to understand that it's not a matter of more hours, it's a matter of more good work in whatever time you've got.
That's exactly right. I like to call it effective work, good work. And it's an important question, because one of the other sort of revelations in reporting this book is just how powerful leadership mindset is. What you believe as a leader, as a boss, as an organizational leader, has enormous power over how you shape your policy, how you shape your culture, and our ways of being. So that's one question. How do you get inside that kind of the CEO suite? And talking to a number of advocates and work redesign experts, I mean, that's a tough question, because a lot of that C-suite that has the power, that can make those decisions, it's largely male. Study after study shows it's like majority male, majority of white male, and many of them have no care responsibilities. It's like that is sort of not something that they deal with on a day-to-day basis and are missing out on. Some actually have experienced and talked about regret after they've retired, or when they've received a life-threatening diagnosis, so to speak. So how do you get there when they talk to each other? And somebody described it, it's like, it's not a cabal, but it is an echo chamber. Mm-hmm. They talk to each other, they have the same life experiences. And so the first thing, it's part of what we learned in the pandemic. Some of the best work redesigns in the pandemic, the leaders got out of their bubble and they talked down. They talked throughout the organization, and they asked people, what are you experiencing? What is your pain point? You start with suffering. Where is it not working and why? And then you get to the people who are closest to the work and ask, how can we make this better? You talked about your own experience of after becoming a mother, you became so much more effective. I experienced the same thing. And in the chapter that I have in my new book, I went to Iceland, because they've got an entire country that went to shorter work hours. And I have to say, coming from the American experience, I was like, I don't believe it. I kind of went with this sort of skepticism, like, yeah, show me. How do you do the same amount of work at the same level, at the same standard, in less time? Because I struggle with overwork. I do too much. I recognize that. You write the books you need to read. And so I went, and it was so fascinating, because the entire movement started very much like you were, like in your experience, with a woman. She was a single mom, and she began to work a shorter work schedule when she had her daughter, and could not believe how much more productive she was. And so then she was in Iceland. She'd moved to Sweden, where they were experimenting with short work hours. And because Iceland is so small, she called up her friend, who was a city council member on the city council of Reykjavik, and said, we should try this. We should try a pilot. And her friend's like, yeah, let's do it. So they tried a pilot of short work hours just with, city workers. And it was so successful. Stress was reduced. Well-being increased. They also did it for gender equality, because when paid work hours came down for men, they spent more time sharing the unpaid work of care and home. So there was more gender equality at home and more gender equality at work. And then so many women were working part-time hours because of those care responsibilities. And all of a sudden, those part-time hours became full-time hours. And so then that increased their lifetime economic security, their pensions, all of that. It was just a wealth of goodness. Then the national government did it, and now it's available to 85% of the workforce.
Do you think that something akin to a 4-day work week should be the way it is in the United States?
Well, so this is what I think. There's no one right answer for every single organization. There's no one size fits all. But what I did learn by really reporting deeply on work redesigns that were both successful and that didn't last, and the ones that didn't last were still successful, but the leaders didn't believe it. And so that was with the power of the leadership. But by reporting on work redesigns and reporting on short work hours movements, it's really clear that there's a process that we can all learn from. It's not like everybody's going to do the same thing, but it's a process where you start by figuring out what is the work that we do. And you would be surprised how many people don't do that. What is the most valuable thing that we do? And then you back it up from there. How do we organize all of the processes to get there? And that's when you have to turn it over to the people closest to the work. Once you're all clear on what it is you're doing, and you're clear on what the output is. You're clear on what the impact is that you want to have, and you're measuring that rather than how many hours you're sitting at a desk, how many hours you're a butt in a chair, basically. You shift your focus, and then you work backwards, and then all of the processes lead to that more efficient, effective work, and you get a better outcome and more time for your life.
So we talked about the institutions. We talked about the changes that need to be made by big institutions down to small employers. I think that your methodology makes a lot of sense. I also think there comes a time when we as individual workers need to control the things we can control. So with that in mind, how do you suggest that somebody who's feeling overworked progress?
It's a really important question. And at the end of both Overwhelmed and this new book, Overwork, I have appendices at the very end because I get it. We live in our own skin. We can control our own lives, and that's where we have to start. And so at the end of Overwork, I have 10 things that you can do as an individual. And it's not everything, but it's sort of like 10 of my favorite things you could do. 10 things for organizational leaders to do. 10 things for public policy and policymakers to think about. And so a couple things that you can do right here and right now. And the first is really do the same process for yourself that I encourage organizations to do. Get really clear in your own mind. So I guess the first thing is like, just stop, just pause. We're all in these kind of tunnels of busyness and we're running around and it's hard to catch our breath. So just stop and really take some time to think about, well, first of all, what do I want? Where do I get meaning and purpose? What's, in the work that I do, what is most important and what do I want more of? What do I really hate but I got to do? And what can I get rid of? And really start with what is, from my perspective, what do I want to do? And then how does that fit with the organization? How do I create the most value for my organization? And how can I make that case clear if anybody asks me? So I can make the case for this is why I'm doing it this way. And then do your own kind of process, work redesign, excellence mission. How can I do my own job in a way that I can create more time and space for what means the most to me? And the easiest thing to do, and not easy, but the first thing to do is really look at how you look at your time. I cannot tell you how many people I've spoken to over the years. When you ask, why are you so overworked? What does your day look like? And they talk about, I'm so busy, I run around, I go to meetings all day, I'm answering emails, I'm just rushing all day. And I get to the end of the day and I haven't done that one thing that was most important. So then I take work home or I take it over the weekend and then I'm really tired and I'm really mad and I don't have time for anything else and I want to go salsa dancing and I don't, And so the first thing to recognize is put that time to do the most important thing on your calendar. Block it out so that people can't schedule you into meetings, so that you get your most important thing done first, or where and when and where you're going to do it. Don't just think that it's going to happen. Because when we get busy and we get sort of like in that breathless hecticness, behavioral science research shows we literally lose 13 IQ points. We get stupid. It's called tunneling. And think about your vision in a tunnel. You can only see the little tiny steps right ahead of you. You can't see the bigger picture. And so that's where you need to kind of break that pattern, disrupt it, go for a walk. Even if you think you don't have time, take 3 deep breaths. It's amazing how that shifts the cortisol in your brain, in your body. And really focus on your pause, focus on your priorities, get peer support, let people know what you're doing, set some boundaries. And I guess the last thing I would say is think about your calendar. Once you've got your priorities set and a time blocked off for it, hold yourself accountable and do it. But another behavioral scientist told me something that I actually use a lot in my own calendar that I love. And he said, rather than thinking about your calendar as like a crowded pantry that you just got to stuff a bunch of stuff into, which is kind of what we think in our busyness culture. Look at me, how busy I am. I'm amazing. Look at how crazy my calendar is. Think about it more like an art gallery. So choose one thing. Pay attention to it. If you're going to be at a meeting, be fully present. Don't be answering emails and then come out and wonder what that was all about and why did you waste your time. Take white space before to prepare. Be fully present in what you've chosen to do. Have white space afterwards so that you have the time to follow up, to think about, to digest, and then intentionally choose the next thing to go to. So some of it is just slowing down and being clear about our own priorities.
When we talk about purposeful work, when we talk about the work that we feel strongly about doing, sometimes there's a conflict between the work and the money. That we need to earn a living. There are things we want outside of work that we need a paycheck to provide. Those two things don't always line up. How do you think about the financial rewards of work?
Yeah, it's such an important question, because that's one of the things that's broken down in our modern era. There was a time, all you have to do, particularly in the United States, look at productivity that has continued to rise since the end of the Second World War. And then you look at average sort of frontline worker wages. They used to rise in lockstep so that the more productive we were, workers would enjoy the fruits of their labor. Well, that started to change in the 70s. Productivity continued to rise, and for most sort of line workers, the wages have stagnated. Now, for very top earners in tech and finance and law, that wasn't the case. They can make oodles of money, and the more they work, the more they earn. But at what cost? Because they're putting in just enormous hours, and sometimes at real costs to their health, to their relationship. You talk to doctors and they'll say, so many of my friends have broken relationships because of the long work hours that we're expected to work. And by the way, we're so tired, it doesn't really make for better care. And so I think these are really important things to remember, that the long work hours really are not paying off. And it's really creating so much more a sense of sort of betrayal for people, that the harder and harder they work, they're putting out more effort than reward that they're getting back.
Do you have a rubric that you use to decide whether or not to take on the next piece of work?
It's a good question. I think, like I mentioned, I do struggle with overwork. And for me, it's...
Me too.
It's because, and this is the thing to think about. I mean, there are different reasons that drive overwork. And I think in my case, I'm super curious about things. I get excited. I have passion. I want to know. This sounds really creative. This sounds interesting. And so it's hard to say no. It's in my case, it's almost sort of like too much goodness out there. That's not always the case for people. And sometimes that overwork is driven by these internal pressures of feeling inadequate or not enoughness, or, that you're filling a hole. And there's a real line that we need to watch between work engagement and when that turns into like workaholism or workaholic tendencies that then end up kind of squishing out time for other parts of your life and relationships. So these are all, your questions they're all so important, things that we all need to be keeping in mind as we think about our own approach to work. In terms of a rubric, one of the things that I've started to do is give myself 24 hours before I say yes to something. So I'm trying to give myself create a little bit more friction, create a little bit more time to pause myself, really look at my calendar. Is that something I can realistically do? And I think a lot of times if people ask you to do something, we want to be nice, we want to help. It's hard to say no. For instance, I'm a mentor editor at the Op-Ed Project. I absolutely love that. It's a project that's trying to get diverse voices out into op-ed pages. And I have had to turn them down twice in the last month, and I feel terrible about it. But I also know, because I gave myself that 24 hours, I had to really think. I was already so overloaded that I wasn't going to do, not only myself, it was going to be too much for me, but it wasn't going to be fair to the person who really deserved the time and attention of a good edit. So giving myself a little bit more breathing room helps me make better decisions about how much I realistically can take on.
My listeners are not going to be surprised to hear that I love that rule, because that's the rule we use for shopping. We call it the purchasing pause. And before you swipe your credit card, dip your credit card, tap your credit card, enter your credit card numbers, whatever you're doing these days, you pause for 24 hours to make sure that you very much need it or want it, and often you find that you don't. Brigid Schulte, the book is called Overwork. Thank you so much for a great conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been wonderful talking with you.
Absolutely. Please come back.